Well, when I first got there, our company was occupying Outpost Harry, and I was there probably, I guess, 3 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. And on the night of the 24th of April, we were what I found out not too long ago. There was 88 of us on the hill on that outpost, 2 platoons, and we were attacked by an estimated 1,000 to 1,200 Chinese at precisely 11 o'clock that night. I can remember being on the machine gun at that time. Our squad leader was Sergeant Kelly, and he would take the machine guns out of the bunkers and put them on top of the bunker because of the fact that he had a much better field of fire, and if the Chinese had overrun the hill in areas, we could swing around and fire to the back of us. So we were on top of the bunker, and our assignment was to call into headquarters every hour. We had to call into headquarters, make sure that we were awake and we were on duty. So at 11 o'clock that night, or just before 11 o'clock that night, it was my turn to go down into the bunker and call into headquarters. And as I was calling, I know Sergeant Kelly answered, and I said, checking in, and just at that time I was checking in, all this artillery and mortars came in. And within 10 seconds, I heard Sergeant Kelly yell out, not on the phone, but yell out. He said, "Geez," he said, "they're in the trenches already." So they had gotten there quite fast. They were in the trenches. I went back outside to go back up on the bunker, and I looked over the trench line, and the enemy was coming up, quite a few of them. So I took my carbine and I fired off to the top of the trench line. I never made it back up to the top of the bunker because I was busy at the position at the entrance of the bunker. There was a box of grenades there. I don't know how many, but at the end of the night, there were none left. I used them all, and come to find out, a round had hit my buddy up on top of the bunker, and he was killed. The machine gun was a few yards away, so lucky for me, I didn't make it back up on top of the bunker. Later on in the night, when the Chinese had gotten control of the upper half of the front half of the outpost, the men gathered down in an area close to where I was, and they called me over, and there was their Lieutenant Baker, who was one of the platoon leaders, and Lieutenant Mitchell, who was our executive officer. They were the two officers that were there at the time. My platoon leader, Lieutenant Whittemore, he was killed earlier that night. And Lieutenant Baker, who was kind of not in charge because he was only a second lieutenant, but Lieutenant Mitchell, he was kind of badly wounded, and they were mapping out a counterattack, and Lieutenant Baker mentioned that he would go up on one side of the trench line because there was a loop, and we were down at the bottom of the loop, and Lieutenant Mitchell said, "Well, I'll go up on the other side." And I can remember Lieutenant Baker saying, "No, you're not, Lieutenant." He says, "Medic," he says, "take care of him." And I looked over at Lieutenant Mitchell, and he had blood coming from covering his face, and the sleeves on his fatigues were rolled up, and he had blood on both his arms. So from there, Sergeant Kelly would lead a group on one side, and Lieutenant Baker would get a group on the other side. We advanced up, and I think it took us maybe an hour, and we cleaned out the top of the hill. And at the end of the night, the early morning rather, we started carrying off our wounded. We had secured a hill, we had a replacement by another company. There was a couple of platoons coming up, but we were taking off the wounded. And I can remember this one fella. He was a good friend of mine, Corporal Lockhart. We called him Lockhart. Everybody called each other by their last name. His name was Corporal Lockhart, and he was in the bunker. And what happened to him, poor fella, when the Chinese came, he went to throw a grenade out the aperture in the bunker, and he missed, and the grenade exploded inside the bunker. But he was still alive, and we put him on a stretcher, and we were heading down the hill. And I didn't get down, I don't think, maybe halfway down the trench line, when two fellas coming up that were, I believe, medics. And I was in the back of the stretcher, and another fellow was in the front of the stretcher. And as we met these two fellas coming up the hill, like I say, I thought they were medics, and they were still, their clothes were kind of clean, so they weren't up on the hill. So one of the fellas grabbed the front of the stretcher from the other fella, and the other one was going to grab my end. And I says, "Oh no," I says, "I'm good here." He says, "No," he says, "I'm taking that." He says, "I ain't going up there," he says. So anyways, we continued taking off the wounded, and that morning we were relieved, and we went back. A day or so later, can you hear that beeping? A couple days later, while we were receiving replacements because of all the, well, let me finish. Of the 88 men that were on the hill that night, we had 72 casualties, 19 killed, and they estimated we killed between 200 and 300 of the enemy. A couple days later, the company commander, while we were back in reserve, he asked all the old timers, the ones that were there for a while, to assemble at the headquarters tent there at 1 o'clock. And we really didn't know what it was about, but there was only a few of us anyway. There was probably 20, maybe 15 or 20 of us, maybe not even that. Some of them were walking wounded anyway. We were going to go to an area not far from there, and we were having a ceremony. And nobody knew what it was about. So anyways, he led us up in a column of twos up this here cart path, and it was just a cart path, that's all it was. And as we reached the top of this little knoll, there was a Greek band out in an open field, and as they saw us coming, they opened up playing Colonel Bogey's March. And we marched down that hill. The company commander called cadence, and we marched into that hill, into that field. And there they presented Lieutenant Baker with the Distinguished Service Cross. We were so proud that one of our men that we fought alongside received this high honor. And I'll never forget that day. And like I say, my squad leader also was decorated. He received the Silver Star. And later on, in my stay in Korea, they recommended me for the Bronze Star, which I received later on.